Europe is building surveillance capability into a region that cannot yet govern the technology it already has.
Yeah, that is a harsh reality, but it's exactly what we're looking at today.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are speaking directly to you, the security professionals, the IT decision makers, and, the policy watchers operating across Southeast Europe.
Right, whether you're defending networks or shaping policy in Serbia, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, Slovenia, Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Kosovo, this analysis is built entirely for your operational reality.
Exactly. And just to look back for a second, in our first deep dive last week, we documented the use of Pegasus spyware against a Greek member of the European Parliament.
Yeah, the MEP who is actively investigating spyware abuses.
Right. And we also explored Bruce Schneier's warning about cybersecurity mission creep, where social issues are increasingly securitized to basically bypass democratic oversight.
Which is a huge structural problem.
It is. And today, our lead story is really those two exact threads violently colliding.
And, that collision is currently playing out at the legislative level over in Brussels, but the impact radius covers the entire Balkan region.
Because the European Parliament has moved to reactivate the Chat Control legislative framework, right?
Yeah, they have. And this legislative push is happening despite a majority of Parliament members having previously voted against the measure.
So let's ground this for the network defenders listening who are tracking the headlines, but maybe haven't dug into the proposed architecture yet.
Sure.
Because Chat Control, it sounds like a boring bureaucratic policy initiative, but the technical mechanics being demanded here are actually highly aggressive.
Oh, absolutely. The core of this framework is mandated client-side scanning of private communications, literally searching for illegal material.
Right. So let's unpack what client-side scanning physically means for the underlying architecture of a network.
Well, the key thing to understand is that the scanning engine doesn't sit on some centralized server. It lives directly on the user's device.
Meaning your phone, your tablet, your laptop.
Exactly. It algorithmically analyzes the content of your messages, your photos, and your files in plain text locally before they are ever encrypted and transmitted.
Wow.
Yeah, and the consensus among privacy advocates and the whole cryptographic community is incredibly unified on this point. Implementing this mechanism effectively breaks end-to-end encryption.
Because, if the payload is being intercepted and analyzed before the encryption protocol even wraps it, the mathematical strength of the encryption itself becomes completely irrelevant, right?
Precisely. The math still works, but the data was compromised before the math was ever applied.
It really feels like the government mandating that you install a camera inside your house that reads your private letters while you're writing them, right before you place them into a high-security vault.
That's a great analogy.
Like the vault might be impenetrable, but the letter has already been read.
Right. And the structural security reality here is that a scanning backdoor cannot exist for a single noble purpose. You just cannot engineer a vulnerability that only works for the good guys.
Or only looks for one specific type of illegal content.
Exactly. Once that client-side architecture is built, and once the scanning capability is deeply embedded into the operating system or the app, it fundamentally belongs to whoever controls it.
Or, which is more dangerous, whoever compromises it.
Yeah, exactly.
Which brings us directly back to Bruce Schneier's concept of mission creep from last week. We're watching sweeping, under-regulated surveillance infrastructure being justified under the banner of a genuinely horrifying harm.
Right. Child exploitation. Nobody is denying that harm.
Exactly. It's undeniable. But the risk profile of this infrastructure changes dramatically depending on where it's actually deployed. This isn't just a thought experiment for policymakers in Brussels.
No, it is very real for the region. The rollout for Southeast Europe is bifurcated, but the ultimate destination is identical for everyone.
Break that down for us.
So the EU member states in the region, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, and Slovenia, they will implement these mandates directly as a matter of European law. But the candidate states, so Serbia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Albania, Bosnia, and Kosovo, they'll be required to align their domestic laws with the EU acquis.
Hold on, let me jump in there. Because EU acquis is exactly the kind of Brussels policy jargon that puts technical people to sleep.
Fair point, yeah.
For the practitioners listening, we're essentially talking about the massive, accumulated backlog of existing EU laws and regulations that a candidate country has to swallow whole as a mandatory condition of joining the club, right?
That is the operational definition, yes. To gain accession, candidate states must adopt the EU's rulebook, and that includes its surveillance mandates.
So the entire region is on a trajectory to ingest this specific scanning architecture.
Exactly. And the assumption in Brussels is that robust, independent institutions will somehow constrain the use of these incredibly powerful tools strictly to their intended purpose.
And here's the uncomfortable reality we just have to state plainly. This Brussels-designed surveillance infrastructure is landing in institutional environments notorious for weak oversight.
Very weak.
Across the region, we are looking at systems with limited independent judicial review, paired with a highly documented, very recent history of turning surveillance tools against journalists, political opposition, and civil society.
Yeah, digital rights organizations operating across the Balkans have been raising huge red flags about this exact pattern.
I mean, logically, when you take a tool built for child protection in Brussels and deploy it in an environment lacking institutional friction and strong democratic guardrails, the risk model just fractures.
It shatters completely. There is absolutely no structural guarantee that a capability deployed in Belgrade, C.I.P.H.E.R, or Bucharest will remain constrained to its original narrow mandate.
Right. So if Chat Control represents this incoming mandate for massive future surveillance, it really forces us to look critically at how the region's institutions are handling the advanced technology they already possess today.
We have to ask if the state is demonstrating the maturity required to govern the tools currently at their disposal.
Then what's the verdict there?
Well, the evidence strongly indicates a profound lack of maturity. In the Balkan public sector today, artificial intelligence adoption has severely outrun governance frameworks.
Meaning what exactly?
We are documenting the unchecked deployment of biometric surveillance, automated decision-making systems, facial recognition software, and AI-assisted document processing across public administration.
And you're saying the pace of this deployment is bordering on out of control?
Oh, completely.
When you say unchecked, you aren't just talking about a lack of public debate, right? Like no town hall meetings. We're talking about fundamental operational failures in how these systems are deployed.
Yeah, I'm talking about core governance failures. Systems are being rolled out without published data protection impact assessments, which we commonly call DPIAs.
Right.
And they're being pushed into production without basic procurement transparency, which just leaves the public entirely in the dark regarding vendor data hoarding practices.
Let me play the proxy for the network defenders listening who usually ignore policy acronyms. Why does a missing DPIA actually matter to an IT decision maker or a SOC analyst on a technical level?
Because a DPIA is not just bureaucratic paperwork. It is the architectural blueprint of accountability and data flow.
Okay, so it shows where the data goes.
Exactly. It maps out what telemetry is collected, where that data physically flows, who retains administrative access to it, and what the specific mitigation controls are for citizen risk.
Right. So when a municipality deploys biometric surveillance without a DPIA, they're flying totally blind regarding the systemic risk they just introduced into the public square.
Yes. And without that blueprint, network defenders cannot properly secure the resulting data lake, because they simply do not have an accurate map of the attack surface.
That is terrifying. And we're also seeing outright regulatory defiance on this front.
We really are. Look at Serbia's aggressive rollout of smart city cameras and similar biometric programs sprouting up across the region.
Yeah, in several of these high-profile cases, the deployments have proceeded over the stated formal objections of the region's own data protection regulators.
The state apparatus is essentially ignoring its own internal safety mechanisms just to rush this technology onto the streets.
And the lack of procurement transparency introduces a severe supply chain risk too, doesn't it?
Oh, massively. If you don't know the exact contractual terms under which these biometric cameras are operating, you often don't know if the resulting facial recognition data belongs solely to the sovereign state.
Right, or if it's being quietly aggregated and exfiltrated by whatever foreign vendor supplied the hardware in the first place. So the structural vulnerability here is staggering. I mean, this is the exact institutional environment being handed the Chat Control scanning mandate.
Exactly. We are handing a loaded weapon of mass surveillance to institutions that are actively bypassing the safety catch on the tools they already have.
Weak institutional capacity paired with powerful, opaque surveillance tooling is just a recipe for disaster.
And look, that structural vulnerability is actively being exploited right now by threat actors.
Which brings us to the mirror image of the state's unchecked AI adoption.
You're talking about how the exact same generative technology that the state is deploying carelessly is now being weaponized against the state.
Yes, specifically to erode public trust and target critical infrastructure.
This is the recent wave of highly targeted deepfake campaigns, right?
Yeah, we are tracking sophisticated AI deepfake campaigns utilizing highly realistic generated audio and video targeting senior regional figures.
Who are they hitting?
2 recent notable targets include the governor of the Romanian central bank and the CEO of Hidroelectrica,
Which is Romania's largest electricity producer.
Exactly.
Break down how these attacks actually function operationally, because they aren't just making funny parody videos. This is targeted social engineering operating at a pretty unprecedented scale. Well, the attackers scrape existing public audio and video of these executives, so press conferences, interviews, earnings calls, and they train machine learning models to clone their voices and visual mannerisms.
Just off publicly available footage.
Yeah. And then they deploy these synthesized personas to authorize fraudulent financial transactions, manipulate market perceptions, or trick lower-level employees into bypassing security protocols.
Which totally eclipses traditional phishing because the synthetic media is designed to bypass the human instinct for verification. I mean, when the CEO of the National Energy Grid calls you and tells you to authorize a vendor payment, you typically do not question the audio fidelity.
No, you just do it. The irony here is super dark.
Oh, absolutely. The state embraces AI for mass surveillance without implementing proper safeguards, and simultaneously, attackers leverage AI to successfully impersonate the leaders of the state's critical financial and energy infrastructure.
And this all has to be framed within the broader regional threat context. Critical infrastructure in Southeast Europe sits squarely at the intersection of geopolitical targeting and advanced information operations.
Right, like that recent reportedly Russian-linked cyber attack against telecom's C.I.P.H.E.R group.
Exactly. That attack successfully breached and leaked sensitive customer records. Telecommunications, energy grids, and transport hubs are facing direct network intrusions to steal operational data.
And that's operating in tandem with information operations designed to destabilize the very institutions defending those networks.
It is a multi-front assault.
So we have State Tower concentrating through unchecked AI deployments and incoming legislative mandates like Chat Control. Surveillance capacity is scaling up massively faster than the institutional checks required to govern it.
Right.
But if the state policy level is in technological chaos, the burden of protecting the actual infrastructure falls entirely on the security teams operating the networks.
The practitioners.
Exactly. So let's pivot from macro-level policy down into the trenches of enterprise defense. Because our third story highlights the deeply unglamorous operational discipline required to hold the line against these threats.
And operational discipline is often where the real battles are won or lost in this region.
So what's the news here?
Cisco has announced a fundamental change to its publication cadence for bundled security advisories.
Okay, so why does a mere scheduling change at a networking vendor actually move the needle for a chief information security officer sitting in, say, Sofia or Zagreb? I mean, if patching is the heartbeat of enterprise defense, did Cisco just give the entire region an unpredictable arrhythmia?
Basically, yes. Previously, Cisco's major product lines operated on a fixed, highly predictable calendar for their major security advisories.
So teams knew exactly when to expect them.
Right. Enterprise security teams knew exactly which day and often which hour those critical advisories would drop. That predictable rhythm allowed them to confidently plan their patching windows, coordinate downtime, and ensure the right engineers were staffed.
But that foundational rhythm has now been altered.
Yeah, the advisory cadence is no longer fixed in that same predictable way.
What is the specific operational reality on the ground in Southeast Europe that makes this change so painful?
Well, Southeast European telecommunications providers, like the recently breached Telekom Serbia, as well as regional banking networks, energy utilities, and critical government ministries, they run heavily on Cisco network cores.
It's the foundational routing and switching infrastructure for the whole region.
Exactly. And crucially, organizations in this region typically operate with leaner security teams and possess significantly less patch automation maturity than their Western European counterparts.
Meaning a regional utility in the Balkans might not have an automated orchestration platform that just seamlessly ingests a patch and pushes it out across the network.
Right. They just don't have that automation.
So they're relying disproportionately on that predictable historical rhythm to manually marshal their defenses. They literally have to manually schedule the weekend downtime, notify the stakeholders, pull the engineers in on a Saturday night, and manually execute the firmware updates.
Exactly. And any shift in that expected advisory cadence directly and dangerously widens the disclosure to remediation window.
Walk us through the mechanics of that window. Why is the timeline between a vendor disclosing a vulnerability and a defender patching it so incredibly unforgiving?
Because the moment a vendor publishes a security advisory and releases a software patch, a race begins. The clock starts for both the defender and the advanced threat actor.
Right.
Advanced persistent threat groups immediately download the newly released patch and perform binary diffing.
Explain binary diffing real quick.
They run the new patched firmware and the old vulnerable firmware through a disassembler. Then they compare the code line by line to identify exactly which function the vendor just rewrote.
So they're essentially playing a highly technical game of spot the difference to find the exact memory leak or buffer overflow the vendor was trying to hide.
That is exactly what they are doing. And once they isolate the specific flaw, they reverse engineer it to build a weaponized exploit.
How fast does that happen?
This entire process, from patch release to a functional weaponized exploit being deployed in the wild, routinely happens within days, and increasingly within mere hours.
Wow. So if a regional telecom defender misses a newly unpredictable publication date because, it dropped on a random Tuesday and didn't align with their expected operational rhythm, they aren't just late to their patching duties by a week.
No, they are entirely exposed to weaponized exploits for that entire week.
And the unpredictability just removes the defender's ability to pre-position their scarce resources.
Exactly. If your lean security team is only structured and staffed to respond during a scheduled weekend maintenance window, you're leaving your core routing infrastructure exposed during the exact critical period when attackers are most aggressively scanning the internet for the newly disclosed vulnerability.
That is a brutal reality for these teams. Let's try to bring these three distinct threads together for everyone listening.
Sure.
Two of these stories, the looming return of the EU chat control scanning mandate and the unchecked expansion of public sector AI across the Balkans, are fundamentally about state power and surveillance capacity being scaled up dangerously faster than the institutional checks required to govern them.
We are watching the infrastructure of mass monitoring being aggressively laid down in a region with a deeply troubled history of abusing it.
Right. And the third story, Cisco's cadence shift, highlights how fragile the underlying operational discipline that keeps the region secure actually is.
Because the macro policy of state surveillance and the micro operations of manual network patching both matter immensely to the region's overall security posture. You can't ignore either one.
Exactly. So we want to leave you with one concrete action for your operations this week.
And the mandate is very clear for security decision makers operating Cisco infrastructure. You must urgently review your patch management workflows.
Because you just can't rely on the old schedule.
No, you can no longer rely on the old predictable release calendar. You must implement active, continuous monitoring for vendor advisories and, frankly, decouple your patching strategy from fixed historical schedules to ensure your disclosure to remediation window doesn't silently expand.
Right. If your defense model relies on manual scheduling based on predictable vendor behavior, you are now operating at a severe disadvantage.
It's a massive disadvantage, yeah.
So I want to leave you with a final, unsettling thought to mull over as you audit your own networks this week.
Let's hear it.
If European governments successfully mandate the installation of sweeping client-side scanning infrastructure across the Balkans, and if regional IT teams are already struggling to keep their core Cisco network equipment patched against everyday threats due to leaner resources and unpredictable advisory schedules, are we simply pre-installing the back doors for the next generation of nation-state attackers?
That is the million-dollar question.
The ultimate threat to regional stability might not just be the advanced hackers you are actively defending against today. It might be the state's own unmanageable, legally mandated attack surface.
Thank you for joining us for this analysis.
We will see you on the next Deep Dive.